Today we're doing more than just revisiting a famous story or a movie. Think of this as a forensic analysis of a global catastrophe. It's a case study in how incredibly complex systems can fail, how simple belief can become a weapon, and how just a few outsiders managed to see the truth that was hiding in plain sight. So let's get into it.
This right here, this single sentence is pretty much the key that unlocks the entire 2008 financial crisis. And it's not really about greed, not in the simple way you might think. It's about a system that was structurally designed to ignore reality. A system where asking the tough questions got you punished, and just accepting the official story was wildly profitable. Right up until the moment it wasn't.
All right, so let's set the scene. Back in the mid-2000s, the global financial system felt invincible. It was built on something that everyone, and I mean everyone, from central bankers down to your local financial advisor, believed was solid as a rock. And that rock was the U.S. housing market.
And this really gets to a critical psychological flaw. The stability of the housing market wasn't seen as just an economic trend or a theory. No, it was basically treated like an immutable truth, like gravity. You just don't question it. And that right there was the first, and maybe the most critical, mistake in a long chain of catastrophic errors. So these were the pillars of faith, right? The unquestioned beliefs. First, housing prices never fall everywhere at once. It just doesn't happen. So if you bundle mortgages from Florida and California and Arizona all into one product, a mortgage-backed security, well, that's the ultimate diversification. Then the ratings agencies come in and stamp them with a AAA, the highest possible grade of safety. And here's the kicker. Everyone's bonuses depended on pushing out more and more of these things, not on making sure any of it was actually any good. Okay, so you've got this system where everyone's convinced everything is safe. A financial assembly line was built to just churn out these safe assets at an absolutely incredible speed. But buried deep at the core of this machine was a raw material that was just deeply toxic. Let's really look at how this assembly line was put together. And this is where the poison gets into the system. Subprime mortgages. And we're not talking about slightly risky loans here. So many of these were literally designed to fail. You had ninja loans given to people with, get this, no income, no job, and no assets. They were lured in with these low teaser interest rates that were guaranteed to explode in a couple of years, making default pretty much a certainty. This is where the financial alchemy really happens. It's kind of brilliant and terrifying at the same time. You take thousands of these awful loans, you bundle them all together into a mortgage-backed security, or MBS. Then you slice that MBS up into different pieces, called a CDO. The whole theory was, hey, even if some loans fail, they won't all fail at once. So the top slices, they were sold as ultra-safe investments to pension funds, to universities. And the rating agencies, you ask? Well, they were being paid by the very banks creating these things to give them their blessing. You see, it all created this incredibly toxic loop of incentives. The banks got paid for volume. The ratings agencies got paid for their compliance, and the investors, the very people who should have been checking the work, just blindly trusted the AAA rating. Literally every single person in the chain was paid to keep the machine running, not to check if it was driving straight off a cliff. And you know what? It all boiled down to this one simple, devastating question that the entire multi-trillion-dollar industry was engineered to ignore. Because deep down, the answer was obvious, and that answer threatened to bring the entire system crashing down.
But then you had this small group of outsiders, investors on the fringes, and they did something that, in this world, was totally radical. They decided to actually look for the answer to that question. They chose to do the verification that the entire system was being paid to skip.
I mean, look at this. It's like there were two completely different realities existing at the same time back in 2005. You had the consensus view, the official story you heard on TV and in boardrooms, but then you had the data view, championed by people like Dr. Michael Burry. This came from actually sitting down and reading the thousands of pages of loan documents inside these bonds. And what he saw was that the loans were garbage, that they were all going to fail at the exact same time when their teaser rates reset, and that the whole thing was built on sand. So the big question is, how do you bet against a system this massive? You can't just short the entire housing market. So instead, they used this instrument, the credit default swap. The easiest way to think about it is like buying fire insurance on a house that you know is filled with gasoline and faulty wiring. You pay a small premium every year, and if that house burns down, if those mortgage bonds fail, the insurance company has to pay you a fortune.
And this is the part that just blows my mind. The big banks, the ones who supposedly knew what was inside these bonds, they were the ones selling the insurance. They happily took the contrarians' premiums, thinking it was free money. Why? Because in their models, a nationwide housing collapse was impossible. Their belief in the system was so absolute, so arrogant, that they sold the very weapons that would lead to their own destruction. That sheer arrogance, that was the trade. Okay, so the bet is on. The fire insurance is bought. But believe it or not, the hardest, most psychologically brutal part of this whole thing was still to come. It was the long, agonizing wait for a reality that only they could see to finally assert itself.
So in 2005, they placed their bets. But in 2006, the bubble just kept getting bigger. They were bleeding cash, paying these premiums, and on paper, it looked like they were just throwing money away. Their own investors started to panic, calling them crazy, demanding their money back. Meanwhile, the banks were fraudulently marking the value of their bonds to hide their own losses. I mean, can you imagine the pressure? To just give up, admit you were wrong, and get back in line? It was immense.
And this really hits on a profound and painful truth, doesn't it? For 2 solid years, the market, their peers, their own P&L statements, everything was telling them they were fools. This system punished their skepticism and just kept rewarding the very conformity that was fueling the whole disaster.
And then it happened. The teaser rate started to reset. Defaults surged. The house of cards didn't just tremble, it just vaporized. Suddenly, those mortgage bonds were worthless, and the credit default swaps, those insurance policies, they became worth astronomical sums of money. The profits were in the billions.
But we have to immediately put that number into perspective. While a few hundred people made billions, the global economy lost trillions. The value destroyed was orders of magnitude greater than the value gained. This wasn't a victory lap, this was a giant blaring warning sign for everyone.
You know, it's really easy to look at this whole thing and think the lesson is be a genius, be a contrarian. But the real lesson here is so much more powerful and, frankly, more useful for the rest of us. It wasn't about predicting the future. It was about analyzing the present. It was about understanding incentives.
No, these are the real questions they were asking. Who gets paid if this thing keeps growing? Who gets hurt if it all falls apart? What are the core assumptions that have to be true for this to be safe? And, maybe most importantly, what's the data that everyone is ignoring because it's just too inconvenient? They followed incentives, not opinions. And that's a framework. That's a process you can actually use to see what others miss.
And that, right there, is why this story is still so important today. Because the next crisis, it won't look exactly like subprime mortgages. The details will be different. But the underlying pattern of flawed incentives, of complexity being used to hide risk, and of narratives that benefit the sellers, oh, that's timeless.
So think of this as your personal checklist, your BS detector, if you will. Be skeptical when something is called safe just because it's popular. Be really wary when complexity is used as a shield to bat away simple questions. Look for who ultimately holds the bag when things go wrong. And always ask if the story you're being told benefits the person telling it more than it benefits you.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most important point. The deep rot in the system and the generational trade to profit from it were born from the exact same condition. They were hiding there, in plain sight, and the one place nobody was really looking.
So that's the question I want to leave you with. Look around. Look at the dominant narratives in finance, in tech, in any complex field today. Look for that consensus that just seems a little too good to be true. And ask yourself, in that system, who gets rewarded for belief and who gets punished for verification? Because wherever you find a system where nobody gets paid to be honest, well, that's where you'll find the seeds of the next big short.